Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to another Burlingame. It's a small town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. This is Mark Lucchese, also known as Mark at the Mic, and my guest today is Russ Cohen, a longtime and very active Burlingame resident. Russ is a former city councilman, current vice president of the Burlingame Historical Society, a founding member of the Burlingame Voice, a founding member of the Burlingame Pet Parade, a member of the Citizens for a Better Burlingame, a member and past chair of the Burlingame Traffic Safety and Parking Commission, past vice president of the Burlingame Lions Club, and past secretary as well, plus many other contributions to the city. So let's find out how a young man from a small town in Deer Park, New York, became so involved in the city of Burlingame. Russ Cohen, welcome to the show.
So far, happy to be here.
Thank you. I think you're going to be very happy to be here today, Russ.
Okay.
Great. Russ, you were born in Flushing, New York.
That is correct, sir.
You grew up in a town named Deer Park, where there were no deers or parks, correct?
That is also correct.
I find that kind of funny, humorous, I guess, or unique.
It is funny if you think about it. And unfortunately for me, I was born in a town that has an unfortunate name, Flushing. I mean, who came up with that name?
Yeah. Hey, that's not where they played the tennis tournament, is it? Flushing, New York?
Yes, Flushing Meadows is where the tournament is played, and also Shea Stadium used to be in Flushing, and the 1964-65 World's Fair was in Flushing.
So it's pretty notable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right. You know, from what I could see, your parents had pretty stable jobs in New York.
Yes. My father worked for the New York City Department of Sanitation.
And your mom was a secretary?
Yes, she was.
Right. So what caused the move to go to Southern California in the middle of high school for you?
Good question. I mentioned the New York City Department of Sanitation. That's where my father worked, and their responsibility was not only to remove the trash, but it was also to remove the snow. So anytime there was a snowstorm or blizzard, he'd be out there in the elements. And of course, he said to himself, and us eventually, the moment he is eligible for retirement, he is going to move to some place where it does not snow. So he had a childhood friend who lived in California, and that's what got us there.
So that childhood friend lived in Southern California?
He did live in Southern California.
Where'd you guys move to? What city in Southern California?
We moved to a little town called La Habra.
Yeah, I've heard of La Habra.
Yeah, Southern California, Orange County.
Yeah.
Near Whittier, near Brea.
Right. Okay, so right now I went and did some research on you, and of course I came up with some fun facts.
Okay, let's hear them.
All right, so while you were in high school, and I'm assuming this would be high school in Southern California, but there was a club called the Russ Cohen Fan Club?
Yes, there was. It was an official club on campus.
All right,
Shall I tell you that story? Yes,
tell us about it.
That story. So this is a good segue between New York and California. When I was a student in high school in New York, I had a industrial arts class in silk screening. And of course, being the goof-off that I was, I didn't do my assignment. And so when I got to class, the instructor said, "We are silk screening today. What do you have?" And I didn't have anything. So I quickly got a piece of paper and I drew a cartoon of myself and I put the Russ Cohen Fan Club on it. And I silk screened a bunch of shirts with this piece of art on it. Skip ahead a year or so, and we're now in Southern California, and I wear one of the shirts to school. So a young lady approached me and she said, "What is the Russ Cohen Fan Club and how do I join it?"
Wow.
I said, "Well, all you have to do is ask." Okay. And then she said, "Well, what do I get if I join?" I said, "Well, you get a membership card." Mm-hmm. And I quickly drew a little membership card and handed it to her. And she was so happy. She told her friends.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, people started wanting to join this Russ Cohen Fan Club.
Wow.
So I am on the yearbook staff, and I say to the instructor there, "We'd like to have a page in the yearbook, the Russ Cohen Fan Club." And he said, "Well, you can't." I said, "Well, first of all, I should stop here. When somebody says you can't, that's when I
fire up and
fire
go.
up,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
So the instructor says you can't. I said, "Well, why is that?" He says, "Well, you're not an official club on campus." I said, "Well, how do you become an official club on campus?" "Well, you have to go to the Associated Student Board. You have to write a charter. You have to present your case. They'll vote on it, so on and so forth." okay, I go home, I write up a charter, I go to the next meeting of the Associated Student Body, I pitch my case, and they debate. They debate, they debate, they debate.
In front of you? Were you there?
Yes,
okay.
in front of me. At the end of the meeting, they decided, okay, we're going to vote to make you an official club on campus.
Wow, you won. It worked.
Yeah, so that worked. So then I went back to the instructor. I said, okay, we're going to have our page in the yearbook. And I presented the paperwork. And he went, okay, so you have the math club and the Spanish club and the Russ Cohen fan club.
Yeah.
The story goes on. The story goes on. Probably by the end of the year, we probably had 75 or 80 people in the club.
Were you doing T-shirts at that time, or was that something in the past?
That was in the past.
Uh-huh.
But people, I was hand making these membership
little cards.
Yeah. So now it's graduation time. We have our picture in the yearbook. We also took out an ad in the back of the.
That's great.
We raised $25.
Yes.
To get an ad in the back of the yearbook. But what was really surprising to me, and the whole thing is surprising to me to this day. In the back of the yearbook, they have what they call senior accomplishments. And that's where people would write, I was on the football team 9 through 12, or the dance club, or whatever their accomplishments were.
Right.
Well, 85 people put down the Russ Cohen fan club as an accomplishment.
Awesome.
And I'm like, that's just crazy.
Was there ever an official meeting of the fan club, or was it just...
We maybe had 1 or 2 meetings.
Yeah.
Our charter was just to do good in the community,
Right.
that kind of thing.
So you were kind of a big man on campus then, in a sense, to have your own fan club.
I guess so. And I was very involved in that school. I was the MC for the homecoming game, and I was in some plays, and I got very involved, and I was voted most spirited and class clown.
What high school was that?
This was La Habra High.
La Habra High. And what year did you graduate?
This was a very long time ago, Mark. 1977.
Okay, well, I was longer than you, Russ, and we won't go into that right now. That's pretty cool, the Russ Cohen fan club.
Yeah, it's funny, it's cool, it's surprising.
Yeah, good for you.
It proves that people just want to belong to something.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
And how silly it is. They just want to belong.
Yeah, and you made it work.
Yeah, it was fun.
Great. How about some more fun facts? I got a few more here. You ready?
You give them to me, or I'll give them to you.
Okay. While you were in college, and that was Cal State Fullerton, right?
Amongst several colleges.
Okay,
yes.
but I guess
Yes.
you bought and sold vintage Cadillacs to pay for tuition, et cetera?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, I wanted to drive them, but I needed tuition money, and that was a pretty good money maker.
How did you even know that? I mean, I don't know if I would have thought
I had
that.
a friend that was into old Cadillacs, and he sort of got me into that.
Right.
And
but this was before the internet and all of that.
Oh, yes.
So
Oh,
how
yes.
did people even know that you were selling them? I mean,
there was a newspaper called The Recycler, and it would come out every Thursday.
Yeah.
And we would rush down to the newsstand to get the issue of The Recycler every Thursday morning, and we would scour the listings for Cadillacs.
right.
And at that time, Cadillacs, you could buy an old Cadillac for pretty cheap.
Yeah, but you had to have a little bit of capital to make that happen to start it off, right?
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to have a
little bit of money to buy-
$1,000
to
or
buy
something
one,
to buy a
to- yeah.
Cadillac, and then you'd clean it up and flip
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And then how did you advertise it? In that same recycler?
In the recycler.
Yeah.
I worked for a restaurant company that owned a lot of bars.
Yeah.
And they would do a lot of contests, and they would give away a Cadillac.
Wow,
And
pretty
so I'd
cool.
go out and find the Cadillac for them. They'd pay me. They'd go and repaint it pink, usually, and then they'd give it away.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Some more goodies here. You are a collector of vintage watches, vintage tie clips, antique flashlights, and this one blows my mind. Okay, this one here is over the top. You have been to over 30,000 garage sales. Is that correct?
That's correct.
30,000.
Yeah, if you do the math, which I'm not very good at, but I started going to yard sales in probably my early 20s. And let's say you went to 10 sales per weekend. Well, I'm old now, so that's a lot of yard sales.
Are you still doing that on weekends? Are you still
I still
going?
do it, not as much as I used to, for a variety of reasons. One is I have a lot of stuff.
Yeah,
and
I would
I need
imagine.
to be getting rid of stuff.
Have
not
you ever
buying
done
stuff.
your own at the house?
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
not as much fun as going to a yard
Right.
sale. But I have a lot of, for the lack of a better term, crap.
Yeah, and that happens.
I need to get rid of.
When you do these garage sales, do you keep it to like San Mateo County or to Burlingame, Hillsborough, Millbrae,
Yeah,
that kind of thing?
We used to go out and before the internet, you'd have to pick up the San Mateo Times to get
Right,
the
it
listings.
had all the listings,
and
yeah.
there weren't that many listings. Maybe there'd be 20 listings, and you could go all the way to Redwood City or
Yeah.
San Bruno. But over time, and with the price of gas, we just kept it to Burlingame
Yeah.
and maybe San Mateo.
Okay. Wow.
But I don't go to as many as I used to, not by far.
So when you were at these garage sales, is this where you started to find your vintage watches, your tie clips, the flashlights, and all of that?
The truth of the matter, Mark, is that I collect everything. I'm not very discriminatory. So if something strikes my fancy, I'll buy it.
Yeah.
That's, watches, tie clips, vintage ties. It starts out as one. Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And then you go to another one and go, oh, that's really cool. That's another one. And all of a sudden you have a collection.
Yeah.
But
boy.
then you get bored and you say, oh, I've had enough of the tie clips or I've had enough of the watches. I probably have 60 watches.
Amazing. Can you tell us what's the difference between vintage and antique, or are they one and the same?
Well, they're both very loosely thrown around. Technically, an antique has to be 100 years or older.
Okay.
And something that's vintage is 22 years to 99 years old. But it's a very loosey-goosey terminology.
All right. Okay. Okay, high school. You graduated high school. Tell me the year again.
1977.
Did you go right to Cal State Fullerton?
No.
You worked for a while?
I went to Cypress College first, got all my general ed
And
out
transferred.
of the way.
Okay. All right. So then you went to Cal State Fullerton.
Correct.
Majored in communications.
Correct.
What year did you graduate from Fullerton?
82.
All right. Did you go right into the working world from there? I mean, did you get married and move to San Francisco? I knew you lived in San Francisco for a while. Walk us through that journey a little
Sure.
bit.
So after graduation from Cal State Fullerton, I saw an ad in the paper for a cartoonist position at a restaurant company. So I applied, I got the job, and I was there for about 6 or 7 years, and I drew cartoons all day long.
Can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Okay, so you majored in communications,
Yeah.
but you're in the world of art. How come you didn't major in art while you were there?
I didn't think I could make a living as an artist, quote unquote.
And here you are.
I took a lot of art classes, of
Yeah.
course, because I liked it. I
Right.
liked drawing. I liked art. You don't see an ad in the newspaper classifieds for a cartoonist all that often.
No.
So I thought, well, let me give it a shot. The job was located in Santa Monica, right on the beach.
Wow.
I lived in a town called Pomona. I
Mm-hmm.
had moved from La Habra to Pomona, which is about 55 miles away.
And you're by yourself at this time, right?
I'm kind of going in and out of apartments and back home and,
Yeah.
that kind
Okay.
of thing. When you're young, you're
Right.
trying to find your spot. So I took the job as the cartoonist, and it was so much fun. It was probably the most fun job I ever had, but I didn't know it at the time because that's what happens. You work and you don't think it's the most fun job, but it was. We laughed all day long. There was a group of us, probably 5 cartoonists, working side by side. The building we owned, the building we worked in, was owned in part by Arnold Schwarzenegger. Oh, so he would come through the office once in a while.
Sure,
We'd have a
Gold's
good
Gym
time.
was around. No, that was in Venice. I'm sorry.
Well,
but there was probably a gym
This
somewhere.
building was on the border of Venice and Santa
Yeah.
Monica, right on the beach. Not that we ever went to the beach because we
Right.
were working.
Yeah.
But it was a fun group of people. It was a company that owned saloons. So, of course, that kind of lifestyle is fun. And in fact, one of the saloons was located across the street. So we would hang out there even after work.
Right.
So it was a fun time.
And how many years were you there?
6 or 7 years, and I decided I really wanted to be in the advertising business. I knew I couldn't be a cartoonist for the rest of my life, although some of the guys that I worked with went on to Disney and Nickelodeon and places like that. In fact, one of them went on to be the director of Beauty and the Beast for Disney, and one of them worked on Cat Dog at Nickelodeon. So a lot of great guys, great senses of humor, just a lot of fun. Anyway, so I knew I wanted to be in advertising, or I thought I wanted to be in advertising. So I decided I wanted to go back to school. I really didn't want to go back to school.
But you knew to get into advertising?
I knew to get into advertising, I'd probably have to go to a school called Art Center College of Design, which is the #1 vocational art school in the country. But I didn't have the money for tuition. So I decided, I saw an ad in the paper that said, Portfolio Day. Come down and show us your portfolio. Well, my portfolio was full of nonsense, cartoons and life drawing. It didn't have any real ads in it. But it had a few that I had made up on my own. So I went down to Portfolio Day. They looked at the portfolio. And I had said to myself before going down there, if they give me a scholarship, I'll go to the school. If they don't give me the scholarship, I won't go. Easy peasy.
1 year, 2 years?
For me, it would have been 2 years, 2.5 years.
Okay.
Because I had already have a degree.
Right.
So I went to that day, and they looked at my portfolio, and they had a big discussion, and they came back to me, and they said, we really love your portfolio. We see the potential. We'll give you half a scholarship.
They dangled the carrot.
Well, that was not the plan. The plan was either get one or don't get one,
Right.
and I could make a decision. So now I had a decision to make.
Yeah.
So I decided I would take the half scholarship, but I would continue to work if I could. Now, nobody at the school worked because it was a very difficult school. It's like medical school. Mm-hmm. So I went to my boss and I said, can we make a deal? I've been here 6 or 7 years. I know the drill. If you leave me the assignments, I'll come in after school and I'll work when nobody is here.
Wow.
And then I'll leave you the assignments, and if there are changes to be made, I'll make them the next day. She said, fine.
Oh, that was great.
So I would drive from Pomona to Pasadena, where the school was, to Santa Monica. I get to Santa Monica at about 5:30. I would work on the assignment that my boss would leave me. Then I would do my homework, and then I would drive all the way back to Pomona.
Wow, that had to be late hours,
like
huh?
3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, I was going to say very late.
Sometimes I would sleep at the office.
Yeah.
I'd sleep under my desk. I'd get up at 6 before anybody would get there, and then I'd drive directly to school.
What time did you have to be at school?
8 o'clock.
Yeah.
So it was a tough 2.5 years. It really built a lot of character. I mean, I thought to myself, if I can do this,
yeah, I could take on a lot of challenges.
I can do a lot of things.
Great.
So it was great training ground.
So was advertising in your career, was advertising where you spent most of your time?
I would say yes, in different forms. I started out at my first job. I got very lucky, and I got a job at a very large advertising agency called BBDO, which we will like to say it stood for Bring It Back and Do It Over. It really stood for Batten, Barton, Durston, and Osborne.
All the partners, right?
Which we used to joke sounded like somebody falling down the stairs. It sort of was the model for Mad Men. Mm-hmm. If you've ever seen the show Mad Men,
absolutely,
you'll see at the credits. You'll see consultants from BBDO.
Oh, really?
Mad Men was the 1960s.
Yeah.
Obviously, I was in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. I call it the silver age of advertising. The golden age was the 1960s. The 80s I call the silver age of advertising, and there was a lot of good work done in the 80s in the advertising business. Like all the famous commercials you can quote are probably from the 80s.
Really? Like the Marlboro Man, Lay's potato chips, that kind of thing?
The things like where's the beef, and I can't believe I ate the whole thing.
Yeah.
And the Energizer Bunny came out in 1989 and is still going strong, like the Energizer Bunny should.
Right.
But so a lot of the things that you can think of, the 1984, the Super Bowl commercial, first real big Super Bowl commercial for Apple Computer, was done in the 80s. And when I worked at BBDO, the creative director there, my boss, was one of the guys who came up with that commercial.
Terrific.
So, and that led to working on a lot of great clients like Apple Computer. I did a lot of work for Apple Computer.
While you were at this particular company?
Right. Apple Computer, Visa cards.
BBDO?
BBDO.
Yeah. Bring it back, do it again, do it over.
Right.
Yeah,
Bring
I love
it back
that.
and do it over.
Yeah. Right. And after that, how long did you stay with them?
I stayed in the Los Angeles office about 3 years, and then I was always the guy who would volunteer to work at other branch offices. So like if the New York office needed help or the San Francisco office needed help, I'd always volunteer to go help help out because travel, free travel.
And you were still single, I guess.
Still single, yes.
Yeah. Had that freedom to kind of go back and forth.
Right. And it was fun because you're on expense account. You could,
Right.
go out to a fabulous dinner and have a really good time.
How long?
It was sort of the heady days of advertising. Anyway,
Yeah.
3 martini lunches and
that still went on?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
It ended soon
because
after that.
Mad Men really depicted it as a
Yeah.
lot of smoking, a lot of
Yeah.
drinking, a lot of whatever.
A lot of
right?
schmoozing.
Yeah.
Because you have to understand, advertising at the end of the day, it's about selling your ideas. Mm-hmm. You have to come up with the ideas. That's the hard part. That's the part I really enjoyed. But then you have to present those ideas to the client.
Yeah.
So that's the tough part. I once presented probably 30 print ads to one client. She just
Jeez.
would not buy anything.
Really?
Yeah, it was very tough.
That had to be discouraging.
I'll mention the client, Oral B.
Oh, really?
Yes, very difficult client.
Man.
Nice people.
Yeah, nice people, but difficult.
Yeah.
Right. Where did you go next? Or tell me some more about the advertising
All right.
career.
So when I graduated from Art Center College of Design, I got a job at BBDO. Long story short, I was helping out the San Francisco office, and I was actually flying back to L.A. every weekend.
Boy.
And those were the days where you can get on a U.S. Air flight for $25 every half hour. It was like taking the bus.
Yeah.
And so on a Friday night, I'd get on the plane. I'd go back home. I still had an apartment in L.A. And then on Monday morning, I'd fly back to San Francisco where they had a thing called, this is so funny, they had a thing called Share Ride. You'd pick up a white courtesy telephone, you'd say Share Ride, and a limousine would pull up, and you'd get in the limousine for $10. They'd give you a ride from the airport to the city, and you might have to share it with somebody else.
Right.
A lot of times I'd come in so early that I'd be the only one in the limousine. So for $10, cheaper than a cab, I'm taking a limousine into the city. I would pull up to the office in a limousine, and people would say, "We must be paying you too much because you're showing up to work in a limousine."
Oh, boy.
So that was challenging but fun again.
So were you living in an apartment at that time then in the city?
I milked this, Mark, for a long time. They put me up in corporate housing on Nob Hill in a beautiful apartment, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, full kitchen, full living room, full
Wow.
dining room. I didn't know how nice it was because I lived in L.A. in a little tiny apartment.
Right.
I thought this was normal for San Francisco. I didn't know it was like palatial.
Yeah.
But it was. It was up on Nob Hill. And then things started to change in L.A. They were having layoffs, and I had been now milking this San Francisco back and forth for 2 years. And the creative director said, "Hey, they're having layoffs in L.A. If you go back, you're probably going to get laid off. Do you want to stay?" And I said, "Sure, I'll stay." Well, that's when they said, "Okay, corporate housing over. You better go find your own place."
Oh, get a place, right.
So then I started looking, and I was
which you
like,
did, right?
Yeah. So I started looking, and at places that were like in the boiler room, because that's all I could afford. A little tiny studio apartment. So I got a studio apartment in the Marina District.
Oh, not a bad place to be,
Not
though.
a bad place to be, but it was a couple of years after the big earthquake.
Okay.
And the type of building that I was in was one of the types that just collapsed in the earthquake. This one didn't, but it was
brutal.
It was the same architectural.
So that was around 90, 91,
Yeah,
92,
yeah, 90,
something.
91,
So when did Connie, your wife, come along?
Right around 94, she was still living in L.A. And
Did you know her in Los Angeles? You didn't know her down
yes,
there?
yes,
Oh, you
we
did.
met. We met at that restaurant company that I
Okay.
was the cartoonist at.
Right. She worked there as well?
She worked in the real estate development division, so we knew each other
Right.
a long time. So by '94 in L.A., that was a bad year. There were wildfires. There was an earthquake, and there were riots. And so in '94, I said, "Why don't you move up here? What is it that's holding you in L.A.?"
Yeah.
I said, if you move up here, I'll find a place, And that's what drove me to Burlingame, actually.
So wait a minute. She moved up to San
She
Francisco.
Yeah.
Did you guys?
I promised her I would find a place in the suburbs so that we didn't have to live in the city if she
Right.
came up.
And so at this time, you were not married.
No.
Okay. So she comes up, and you find a place in Burlingame.
Right.
How did you stumble on Burlingame?
Interesting story.
Yeah.
Glad you asked.
Yes.
So a friend of mine who was also a photographer, advertising photographer, we were doing a job on a Friday night. Well, that's the night that I usually fly back to L.A. He said, well, after the shoot, I'll give you a ride to the airport. I live near the airport. I said, okay, great. That sounds good. He said, well, why don't we leave a little early? We'll stop by my house. We'll go have some dinner, and then we'll go to the airport. Well, that sounds good. Well, he lived on Concord Way, which is a beautiful street.
Right.
And he happened to live in the last house next to the park.
Yeah.
So we went to his house. We walked through Washington Park. We went to Burlingame Avenue. We had dinner at La Piñata.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And I remember thinking this. I remember walking through the park thinking, I just walked down a beautiful tree-lined street, through a beautiful park, past a train station that I could get on every day
Right.
and go to work in the city. I could go have dinner and walk home. It doesn't get any better than that.
No, it had to be pretty cool, right? Pretty like, oh my gosh.
It was an oh my God moment.
Yeah.
It was, I also like the small town feel of it too.
Right.
And so when I went back to the office, my colleagues were telling me, "Oh, you got to move to Marin. You got to move to the East Bay. Mill Valley." And I said, I saw this little town called Burlingame.
Were they saying that because those areas are a little bit more hip than, say, Burlingame?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
exactly. I mean, Mill Valley was sort of
Right.
a hip place to be, especially when you're in advertising,
Yeah.
Advertising was a very important industry in San Francisco at the time. It's sort of like the movie industry was important in Los Angeles. Well, the advertising business was important in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Advertising and design was very, very it was an economic driver, and there were a lot of ad agencies in San Francisco at the time.
And there's not many left anymore?
They're shadows of their former selves.
Is that because of the onslaught of the internet
Yes.
and
Yes.
Instagram and
Yes.
all of that?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
We could do a whole show on the changing
Okay.
face of advertising.
Yeah. What year did you officially move into Burlingame then?
I want to say it was 94.
94.
90
Connie comes up from L.A. to
Connie
move in.
comes up. I had found a little house for rent on Crossway Drive.
Crossway.
Crossway Drive Road.
Okay. And you continued to work in advertising
I
in
did.
San Francisco,
Yes.
taking the train back
Yes,
and forth?
Back and forth. I switched agencies eventually. Went to an agency called FCB, or Foot, Cone, and Building.
Yeah.
Was the name. Worked on Taco Bell there. Actually did the voice, the little tagline that says, "Cross the border." Did that in a couple of commercials.
That's
just for
pretty
fun.
cool. Yeah. What did Connie do for work when did she stay with that same company or did she leave that
No.
company?
She worked in L.A. She worked for a company called AGFA. I won't tell you what that stands for.
Okay. All right.
But that was a film company, mostly medical film, motion picture film. But she left that job when she moved to San Francisco, and I can't remember the chronology of it. But eventually she went to work for Mercy Center.
In San Francisco?
No, here in Burlingame.
Oh, Mercy Center.
Yeah, Mercy Center.
Got right over there on Adeline. Is
Right.
that what you're saying?
Right.
Really? How long was she there?
Oh, about 12 years.
Terrific. All right. So, you moved to Burlingame, you're settled in and all that. How long were you around in Burlingame before you decided to really kind of get involved in all of these things that were involved in and are still involved in?
Good question.
Yeah.
It was right around 96, I think. So not long. I'd only been here a couple of years.
Right.
We had then bought a house, moved from Crossway Road. And I was driving down California Avenue, and I don't know if you recall this. You probably do, Mark. There was a theater on the corner of Broadway and California Drive,
Encore.
the Encore Theater,
Right.
originally the Broadway Theater. And it wasn't being used as a theater. It was being used as a church. And the reverend at the church, he would put these funny sayings on the marquee every day.
Yep.
Well, one day I'm driving by, and it said something like "Goodbye Burlingame" or "Thank you Burlingame," something to that effect. And I thought, well, I wonder what's happening there. So I pulled the car over, and I knocked on the door. I'd never been in the building before. And the Rev,
Yep,
as
the
he
Rev.
would call himself, came out and invited me in. And I went in, and it was this beautiful old theater, later to find out it was built in 1931. And it was all original. Nothing had been changed. And I thought, this is great. I want to take some pictures of this, but I have to get to work. So I said to the Rev, I said, what are you going to do? What's going to happen to the building? Why does it say "Thank you Burlingame" or "Goodbye Burlingame"? He said, well, they're going to knock down the building. I said, really? I said, can I come back after work and take some pictures? He said, yes. So later on that afternoon, I'm driving back, and half the building's gone.
Wow, they came in with that
And
boulder block or with ball and just knocked it down.
Yeah,
huh?
it wasn't completely knocked down,
Yeah,
but
but
the process had started.
in several hours.
Yeah, and so in about 8 hours. So I thought to myself, and this is not about preservation. This was a neat old building. For me, it was about process. I thought to myself, how could somebody just go down to City Hall, pay their $12 or $20 for a demo permit, knock down a building, and be done with it with no notice, no discussion, no negotiation, nothing? I said, there's something wrong with the process. So my ire was up now.
Are you saying at that time there was no public notice given out?
No.
Okay.
Not that I'm aware of.
All right.
So I went home, and it was sort of council season. And I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to run for city council. I don't like the process. And she said, nah, don't do that. And I went to a few city council meetings to see, what the discussions were about, what the process was about. And one day she says, you shouldn't run for city council, but there's a young lady running for city council right now that seems to think sort of along the same lines you do. But it's her first time, and you're in the advertising business. Maybe you can help her run for city council. And I said, no, I don't really want to do that. The next night, I come home. In my kitchen is Kathy and Joe Baylock. My wife had called Kathy and said, my husband is willing to help you run for council. Even though I said, I don't want to do that.
Right.
She had volunteered my time. So that's how I got introduced to local politics, and I helped Kathy run her campaign. She didn't win, but I learned a lot, and I think she learned a lot too. So that continued for several rounds of council.
So just to, for our listeners and myself, again, that was what, 95 or 96, give or take?
I would say by that time was a little later than that.
Okay.
By the time, I would say 96 is when it all began. Really.
All right. And we're going to get into that a little bit in a few minutes with your time on city council. But before we go there, I want to talk about the Burlingame Voice.
Okay.
Which was, at that time, it was a print edition.
Only,
yes. Print only newspaper, right?
Yeah.
2 or 3. What would you call it? I mean,
I'd call it it's more of a leaflet than a newspaper, but yeah.
A leaflet.
We like to think of it
local
as a newspaper,
stuff.
Yeah.
But it was it was established in 99 or 2000?
That's a really good question. I don't remember the actual year.
Yeah.
To be
All
honest.
right.
But you have a whole podcast on the Burlingame Voice. So
I know that.
If anybody's really interested,
I should go back and listen, right?
We'll cross-merchandise here and promote that episode.
So for those that didn't listen to it, though, that didn't listen to that podcast, how did the paper originate?
Okay, so there were lots of things happening at the council level as far as land use goes. One big issue was the hospital. There was this whole discussion about knocking down the hospital and building a new hospital, and that was its own district, the healthcare district. And some people in town were upset about that and other issues. And so I had written a letter to the newspaper. And in the letter, the letter was to the Boutique and Villager newspaper at the time, and Jerry Fuchs was the publisher. I didn't know Jerry Fuchs was the publisher. I thought he was just a columnist.
Okay.
And he had written a column about something that, raised my ire again. And I wrote a letter, and at the end of the letter, I said something like, if I had the wherewithal, I'd start my own newspaper, because I don't think this newspaper is covering Burlingame issues the way they should be.
Right.
So another young man in Burlingame was hot and bothered by the hospital project and the way that was being handled. And he called a meeting at his house, and a lot of people showed up to the meeting, including myself. And I think at the time, a young lady named Ruth Jacobs, she was the first female planning commissioner here in Burlingame.
Okay.
And she was on the planning commission for a very long time. I want to say 20 years.
Ruth Jacobs.
Ruth Jacobs.
Okay.
And we were talking about something in the meeting, and she said, we should start our own newspaper. I read this letter in the paper about this guy who wants to start his own newspaper. And I was in the room. And so I raised my hand, and I said, well, I was the guy who wrote that letter.
Right.
And so then we decided out of that meeting, we would have kind of a subcommittee meeting about this whole idea of starting our own newspaper. And so we gathered at my house, a few people, maybe 10 people, and we figured out how to, we would fund it ourselves. We would not accept advertising because we didn't want anything to influence the content. And we started out, again, you can see this on your other podcast, we wanted to be very objective, like a regular newspaper should be. But after about 3 or 4 issues, we decided, why are we being objective? First of all, nobody else is being objective the way they should be, and we're not certified journalists. We're citizen journalists.
Right.
So, we can espouse our own opinion if we want to. I mean, isn't that the whole point?
Yeah.
And so we started doing that, and we would pass it out by hand. We would go to all the neighborhoods, and we funded it ourselves, and we, laid it out. I would lay it out, and we'd come up with all the content, and we'd pass it out by hand.
How often did it come out back then?
Was when we could afford to print.
Right.
There was no regular schedule, and we actually like that.
Yeah.
Because then it's always a surprise that when it comes out. There was no regular schedule.
Yeah. And was that something you would take like to Kinko's to print up?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I think it was started out as a 2-sided leaflet that it eventually became like 4 pages.
Yeah.
We would just print it out on a copy machine.
Am I mistaken, or did you do some editorial cartooning at that time?
A little bit later on, probably maybe 2000, maybe 2001.
Yeah.
I approached John Mays and I said, I write a lot of letters to the editor. I said, what if I drew you a cartoon instead of wrote you a letter? Would you be open to that? And he said, yes. And then I got bold and I said, well, what if I did it on a regular basis? Would you pay me to do it? And he said, well, we don't have a lot of money, but I can cough up a little. Uh-huh. So I would do 2 cartoons per week.
And you would just come up with the idea on your own, or
Yes.
would he feed you something?
No, it was completely on me to come up with whatever I wanted to do. I tried to mix local politics with national politics.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, won a couple of Peninsula Journalism Awards for national issues.
Terrific.
Yeah.
How long did that go on for?
Probably a year and a half or so.
Is it because John ran out of money, or you just ran out of got into too
well,
much
it was
over your head or something?
Combination of things.
Yeah.
One is it wasn't a moneymaker for sure.
Of course, right.
And to do editorial cartoons, it's not the drawing that's hard. It's the coming up with the idea.
Yeah.
And I had to do 2 a week. And some weeks I'd be pacing the floor thinking, I have no idea. Just like advertising.
The stress begins, right?
You're given a blank page, you're given a strategy and an objective, and you have to execute on it. The editorial cartoons were very similar, where you have a blank page and it's staring you in the face, and you got a deadline. And after a while, it was like it was too much. And I took a lot of grief for some of the cartoons that I did.
Oh, I bet.
From many local politicians who I made fun of. But the funny thing is, they would call me and say, I really hated that cartoon you did about me. Can I get a signed copy?
Yeah. They frame it, put it in the office, correct? Oh, it's funny, man. So did you ever do any cartooning for The Voice?
A little bit.
Yeah.
A little bit.
But I think I remember you had a column, didn't you, for The Voice?
Yeah, sure.
What's up with that?
That was a little column in the back.
Yeah, but it was kind of a fun column. Kind of a satire on things going on around town.
Well, not so much satire, but more about asking the question. Maybe not having the answer, not having a solution, but just an observation of, what's that all about? Why are they doing that?
Oh, okay. So. Towards the end of the show, would you mind sharing a couple that are for present day? Can you come up with a couple?
Well, Mark, I could complain about anything.
I know,
on a dime. So if I could make a living complaining, I'd be a rich man.
Gosh, that was great. It was fun though, man. And anyway, all right. So the Burlingame Voice is continuing,
yes,
huh?
It's online only. BurlingameVoice.com.
And is Joe Baylock pretty much a one-man band?
Joe runs the show.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, I've kind of taken a bit of a backseat.
Right, and so has all the other founders, right?
Oh yeah,
pretty much.
Yeah, the whole group of people. Yeah. Some unfortunately passed away. Some moved.
Right.
Some decided it wasn't for them anymore.
Yeah, he seems to publish though. I don't know, 3-4 times a week.
Yeah. He loves to write.
Right, and it shows, and it's great.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, some of the time we don't agree with one another, but that's
of course,
okay.
That's what it's about,
Yeah,
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, we're going to talk a little bit about City Council.
City Council.
All right. You told us how you got fired up about City Council and all that, but you did serve on City Council.
I did.
Finally. Did you have to run for that office? How did that all work?
To get into the weeds, I had run once before, and I think I lost by 100 votes.
Wow. It's not cheap to run, is it?
It is not cheap to run, especially in Burlingame at
And
that
in those
time.
days, they had the whole city. Now it's broken into districts.
That's correct.
Right.
When you ran citywide, back in those days, there were a lot of people that wanted to run for city council, and so it was very competitive, and the cost to run was fairly expensive. I mean,
Right.
people were spending $50,000-$60,000 on a campaign, and I certainly wasn't going to do that. And the people I knew were not high rollers. They were, here's $10, here's $15, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't spend nearly that kind of money. So I ran once. I lost by 100 votes. Then a man named Mike Coffey, who was on council, decided he was going to step down before his term was over. So there was in that cycle, that council cycle, there was a 4-year seat open and a 2-year seat open. Now, even though I lost by only 100 votes, I decided I would give somebody else a chance to run. So I wasn't going to run. But then this 2-year seat opened up, and I thought, well, maybe I'll run for the 2-year seat.
Right.
So I did do that, and I did win the election for that. And so I served on the city council for a short time.
2 years.
2 years.
Did you decide to rerun?
Yes.
Run again?
Yes, I decided to run for re-election, and I lost my bid for re-election because, again, I was outspent by 10 times probably.
Yeah.
So I did not win re-election.
Do you remember some of your fellow council members while you were on there for 2 years?
Sure.
Yeah. Who were they?
Rosalie O'Mahony.
She was on for a long time, right?
Terry Nagel.
Yeah.
Kathy Baylock.
3 ladies so far.
And who am I forgetting?
Galligan?
Oh, Ann Keekren.
Okay. So there was 4 women at
Yeah.
one and you would be the only male.
That is correct.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good council, though.
Yeah,
it seems like it was.
It was a good. I thought it was a good council.
Yeah.
We had some very robust discussions.
Yeah.
We didn't always agree with one another, which I think is the way it should be.
Right.
I really. I'm not a big fan of councils that are kumbaya and they all get along. Mm-hmm. It's not about personality; it's about perspective. Mm-hmm. And I get concerned when everybody shares the same perspective.
Right. Can you remember any kind of notable accomplishments that were done? I mean, I know we're going back some years, but anything that you're...
Well, I was only there for 2 years, so it was difficult to get anything done in that short amount of time. But one of the things I like to say that I'm responsible for are the waiting structures at the train station. If you look at our little waiting areas at our Burlingame train station, they are reminiscent of the original waiting stations at the train station, as opposed to everybody else along the line who have just traditional, look like bus shelters.
Right.
So because of my involvement
I'd always thought those were original. That's amazing.
Well, if you come to the Burlingame Historical Society Museum, which we hopefully will talk about soon, you can see a little bit of the history of those little structures.
We're going to get to that museum in just a couple of minutes.
Okay.
You've done a lot in the city. That's for
true.
sure.
That is true.
But another thing that caught my eye and I thought was really interesting was the Burlingame Pet Parade.
Burlingame Pet Parade.
Which is on Broadway, and it seems like it's gotten more popular over the years.
Yeah.
Am I correct on that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And you were one of the founders.
Yeah, I can
How
tell
did
you
that
that
come
story.
around?
Sure.
I mean, you sitting around and...
No, not really. So when I was on council, one of the things that I thought should happen was there should be more town hall meetings where the public is invited. You get to talk to council members or the mayor, whoever. So we did that. And I also sent out an email and I said, we're getting to that cycle where we're going to decide what our goals are. I'd like your feedback. And I got a lot of feedback. And then we had a town hall meeting, and a lot of people showed up to the town hall meeting, and they had ideas. And I remember Rudy Horak, the late Rudy Horak, said we should have a pet parade.
Yeah.
And that was one of maybe 200 different ideas.
Right.
And so somewhat later, I said, Rudy, let's talk about your pet parade idea. So we met over on Broadway.
Is that where Rudy lived, over by Broadway?
Rudy lived on Paloma and Edge Hill.
Yeah, okay.
And so we met over lunch, and we talked about it. And then we walked out. We ran into Ross Bruce, who people call him the mayor of Burlingame.
Right, he's a fixture.
Broadway, I mean.
Yeah.
And we talked about it, and then we talked about, should we get the Lions Club involved? Because in the past, in the distant past, the Lions Club would put on parades every year. So we talked about it a little bit here and there. But we didn't really work out the details all that much. And then, I was telling the council about it, and Terry Nagel, to her credit, sort of picked up the ball and started to organize things around the pet parade. And we had a little committee and, got together and tried to work out the details of where it would be and how it would work and how would we judge. And so I volunteered at the very least, my cartooning background again, I'll do the flyer. The pet parade flyer. And I've done probably 25 years worth of flyers, I think.
Terrific.
Something like that.
Right.
So every year I do the flyer. So credit to Terry for sort of taking the ball and running with it. But yeah, that's how the pet parade started.
How did you decide to have it on Broadway versus Burlingame Avenue or Howard or something like that?
I think we all collectively decided, including Ross Bruce, that Broadway needed a little love and attention.
Right.
Burlingame seemed to get their share of attention, and Broadway needed a little of that, and so that's what we decided.
What was the first year for that parade?
Oh my gosh!
Yeah,
I'd have to look it up.
I know.
I don't want to give you the wrong information.
And it's still on. Is it held like the same weekend of the same month every year?
It's always in September.
Yeah,
yeah,
and it's gotten bigger.
Yeah, oh yeah,
it's terrific.
Yeah,
are you still involved in it?
Not really, except I still do the flyers.
Right. Oh, you do.
Yeah. Oh,
Good for you. Okay, great.
I think I've probably done 20 or 25 of them now. I try to do a new one every year.
Yeah.
It's
great.
Fun. It's fun.
Yeah. All right, we've arrived. We have arrived at the Burlingame Historical Society Museum.
Oh, okay.
This is your baby, okay?
Okay.
Yeah, this is your thing. Definitely very near and dear to your heart. Okay, you've had a big play in this for many years. How long have you been a historical member? Historical Society member?
I want to say I probably joined in either 99 or 2000.
Yeah,
something like that.
25 years.
25 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Boy,
I have to tell you, when I joined, the Burlingame Historical Society was about to shut its doors. I mean, it was founded by a group of ladies.
Oh, I remember them.
And they were older now, and nobody wanted to do anything. They weren't answering the phones. They weren't collecting anything. They weren't doing a little bit of cataloging, but that's about it.
Yeah.
A funny thing was, we were trying to elect a president, and one of the former presidents said, well, I'll do it again as long as I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
And I went, okay. We've got to do something about this. So that's
Right.
when I got involved with the Historical Society.
And then how long did it take for you to become president?
Not too long. I'd say a couple of years.
Yeah.
I had to build trust there. Nobody knew who I was. And,
Right.
How
long did you serve as president?
I want to say about 10 years.
Wow, it's a long
12
stretch.
years, something like that.
And then Jennifer
followed my footsteps, yes.
Yeah.
She's done a fabulous job. Absolutely.
She
fabulous.
has.
Much better than I could ever do.
Yeah. So just tell me some of the accomplishments that when you joined and then you became president, what are some things that you remember happening?
Well, the first thing is trying to reinvigorate the Historical Society. It was very quiet, dormant, I would say.
Was there a newsletter at that time?
Yeah, there was a newsletter, hastily put together probably. I did take that job over in the beginning and just publicizing the Historical Society.
Was there a website? Was there a website? No, there was no website.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No.
Right.
Like I said, it was fairly dormant organization, and so trying to raise its profile, market it, and get some things accomplished. Actually get some things done. During my tenure as president, we wrote a book. We published our own book.
What book was that?
Burlingame Centennial, written by Joanne Garrison.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
That
beautiful book.
That was a major accomplishment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Opening the museum was a major accomplishment. Yeah. Restoring the mural that was discovered on California Drive, the Dairy Boy, we call it. Mm-hmm. Restoring the cupola, which is being restored again now.
Can we talk about the museum for a minute?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Okay, before there was the museum, where was the Historical Society storing all of its memorabilia and its collectibles?
Well, when the Burlingame Historical Society started in 1975 by this group of ladies, one of the ladies was Martha May, and Martha and her cronies would gather stuff and they would keep it in their houses, underneath the dining room table and underneath the beds, and their houses became the storage.
And those could be
spaces.
old newspapers, they could be signs, they could be anything, right?
That had to do with Burlingame.
Yeah.
Right. They recognized the fact that nobody was saving anything.
Right.
And our history was being lost. So kudos to them.
Yeah.
Back in the 70s for recognizing that. But they didn't have a place to put all this stuff. So Martha, saw some opportunities, and she petitioned the city to give us the space above the original carriage house of the Gunst Estate in Washington Park.
That's located at the back of Washington Park.
The back of Washington Park near the Rose Garden.
Right.
And they agreed. And so in 1985, we got that space, long before I joined.
Yes, right.
And so they began to have
Store
a place
things
to
there?
store things and catalog things by address, which is very unusual, but it's great for us for research purposes. If somebody wants to know about a particular location, we can look it up fairly easily. Skipping ahead to when I joined, I recognized that there was a down cycle there, and so we needed to get new members, get new people on the board, because nobody on the current board really wanted to. They had been doing it for umpteen years. They were tired. I understand that completely. So we recruited new board members. I think at the time I joined, Kathy Baylock was already a member of the Historical Society, and she recruited me to join. And so I built some trust with the older ladies, and Martha especially, and became president and realized we have a lot of work to do, and we just hunkered down and started to get to work.
Is that when the birth of the museum came along?
So we, I say that loosely, had a desire to have a museum, because in the archives in Washington Park, there's got to be more than 125,000 artifacts, manuscripts, photographs, signs, what have you. But we weren't sharing it really with anybody. Now, we would do research for people, but we didn't have a place to share this great stuff.
Yeah.
And hey, I'm a collector and I like to show off my collection. So I said, maybe we have a museum someday, but we really didn't have a plan. But I was still taking the train to work. And one day, I think around 2006, 2007, there was a sign on the station window saying, "We are no longer allowing people to come into the waiting room or buy tickets inside. You can only buy tickets from the electronic machines outside." So that's when I thought to myself, this could be our museum. Because first of all, the building's on the National Trust. So there, with that comes some restrictions. I hate to use that word restrictions, but I can't think of a better word. So it wouldn't be attractive to a restaurant or a office space. One, because it's on the National Trust, and for example, you can't put a nail in the wall. Mm-hmm. Right?
Oh, you can't, right?
You have to do it in a way where it's reversible, and you can make the argument that I could put a nail in the wall, then I could fix it. Anyway, there are some restrictions to that. That I don't want that to be confused with National Trust registered houses, because that comes under a different set of criteria. So what I say about the museum and its restrictions don't necessarily apply to other National Trust properties. Anyway, so I went to the folks at Caltrain, and I made my case, and they debated. Reminded me of that Associated Student Body.
Yeah, but
debate.
they debated in private over this or in front of you?
In private. And they would call me back once in a while and ask me questions. So it took about a year, I would say, before we came to a mutual understanding agreement. And the agreement was that we could use the space. There would be no long-term lease. So technically we're on a month-to-month
Is there a
basis.
rental then? It's rented?
It was supposed to be we pay for utilities and some maintenance
So it was a pretty amazing deal for the
for
Historical
us, because
Society.
we, as a nonprofit, we didn't have the kind of money to pay rents.
Yeah.
The kind of rents that Burlingame realizes. So yeah, that was a pretty big coup, but it was sort of a be careful what you wish for. It's like, okay, now you have this space.
Yeah.
How are you going to put this together? Especially you have some volunteers on the board, and they're older, and
You have limited resources.
limited resources,
Yeah.
exactly, and limited funds. But we managed to put together our first exhibit, and our goal was to open the museum by our centennial year, 2008. By the skin of our teeth, we made that goal.
That had
and
to
we also
take-
published the book in 2008.
Yeah.
Also, in order to raise more money to do the kinds of projects we wanted to do, including the museum. So we opened with an exhibit called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles.
Oh, okay.
And it was fun. We had a couple of cars, real cars, in the museum. We had a Model T that the police department had restored, and we had a 1958 or 59 Plymouth Fury inside the building.
I don't know how you got it in there.
We got it in through there's two double doors, and we probably had a half an inch on either
both
side
sides.
clearance
Wow.
to get it in, but we got it in. Thank you, Dean Treft, for helping on that project.
Yeah.
Dean's Auto Body. Little plug for Dean.
Yeah.
And so that was successful for our first exhibit. However, it was a learning experience too. What we learned was there wasn't enough information about the sort of the formation of Burlingame and Hillsborough. There was some neat information about planes, trains, and automobiles, but there wasn't that basic fundamental information about, well, how did the town start and who was Anson Burlingame and so on and so forth. So I think that first exhibit lasted a couple of years probably.
So it was left that way.
Yeah, it was left that way. And then we decided we would redo the whole thing. And the guy who lent us the car wanted his car back.
Sure.
And the police department needed their car back too. So we decided we would change the exhibit and add some more fundamental information.
When you were showing that exhibit, was it like people could come by and just look through the windows, or were you?
Oh, no, we were open. In fact, in the beginning, we were open every Sunday.
Yeah.
But finding volunteers
It's not
for
easy
every
to do,
Sunday,
especially on a
was
Sunday.
tough.
It's
And we
difficult.
also, another part of the learning experience was we realized that if you're open every Sunday, then people kind of wander in because they're in the area, or they want to use the bathroom, or they're waiting for the
Right.
train. But if you limit it and you're only open the first Sunday of the month, then people make it a destination. Yeah. They really want to see the museum. And I think that's an important side note to realize that these people are coming specifically for the museum. They're not coming because they were on the avenue and they happen to be walking by and they have a passing interest. The people who are coming to the museum now, they really have an interest. And it's fun to talk to those people.
So it was closed for a while, for a long while, actually.
Well, because of COVID.
It was COVID that shut it down?
It was COVID that shut it down.
Was it going pretty good up until 2020?
Yeah, I mean, it was going okay.
Yeah.
People were interested. But interestingly enough, so we've been open since 2008. By 2020, there were still people who didn't know we had a museum.
Right.
I think today,
There is today, too.
To this day,
Yeah.
they don't know it.
We're going to talk about that. So it shut down in 2020, but it's reopened. And it just reopened a couple of weeks ago. Right. And it was shut down for about 4 years, I guess, right?
Yeah,
3.5, 4 years?
Well, yeah, I would say that. And in the beginning of COVID, there were no plans to do anything with it. We were
Right.
going to reopen when COVID was over.
Yeah.
But we didn't realize how long the whole COVID crisis was going to last. And so about the second year in, I went to the board. I said, hey, why don't we take advantage of this time and redo the museum entirely?
Right. It became your adopted son.
Right. And
Or daughter.
So again, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
I sort of took a big bite out of the apple on this one, and I drew out a plan and everything, and I had some grandiose plans.
And you know what, though? I mean, you were pretty much of a one-man band. You got a little help here and there. We all know that. But pretty much that was your thing.
And thank you, Mark, for stepping in when I needed some heavy lifting.
I couldn't give you much help, but I did try. But
appreciate it.
Anyway, you kind of worked on the whole thing for a couple of years, huh?
Yeah, it was a couple of years, but it wasn't. I have to caveat that with saying, it wasn't every day for a couple of years because was out of town for a month.
Yeah.
And,
You have a life.
My mother got sick,
Right.
and, that kind of thing. So,
Right. Yeah. During those 2 years that it was closed and you were in there doing your thing, what were some of the challenges you came up with? I mean, in your head, did you have like an idea of what you wanted it to look like?
Yes and no. I mean, some of it is flying by the seat of your pants. It's sort of like building the airplane while you're flying it. The space is limited. That's the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
It's not a big space. And we have 125,000 things that we could show off.
Oh, boy.
So the first challenge to overcome was, how do we display all of this stuff when we can't affix things to the wall with a nail or a screw?
Yep.
So that's when we decided, well, let's build our own walls. And locate those in the middle of the room so that at least we could hang things on those walls, especially heavy items. Right? If you have a heavy item, that's not going to work with sticky tape right on a wall. So you have to have some place to put those heavy items. So that was the first thing we did, was we paid somebody to build those walls.
Yeah.
We try to get volunteers, but sometimes people say, look, that cost me money to do.
Right.
I need to get paid for that. And that's fine. So we built the walls, we painted the walls, and that gave us a starting point.
And then you had some glass cases.
We had a lot of glass cases, which I'm not a big fan of glass cases because first of all, it's hard to see things in glass cases, especially if they're flat items. If they're dimensional items, it makes it a little easier. But we didn't have a lot of dimensional items.
Right.
We had a lot of flat, photographs and manuscripts and signs and that kind of thing. So the second challenge was, we had a collection of about 3 or 4 neon signs from old businesses in Burlingame, but they were broken. That's what happens with old buildings, is the signage gets neglected. And so we had the funds from the sale of the book and other sources, donations. We always run a fundraising campaign every year. People are very generous, and we thank our donors very much. And so we had the funds to hire a neon artist to restore signs. I had to do a lot of research to find that person, but we found a young lady in the city that was willing to take on the project, and so she restored 3 of the 4 signs that we had in our collection. The 4th sign is a very large Toll's Fountain sign, if you remember Toll's.
I sure do.
We have the sign, but it's in disrepair.
Right.
And right now we don't have the room to display it.
Yeah.
So the showcases actually came in handy, because we could then put the neon signs inside those showcases so that people wouldn't bump into them and break the neon, because
Very
it's
nice.
fairly delicate.
Yeah.
So that it actually worked out well.
I mentioned that it has reopened.
Yes.
A little grand opening was, a couple of weeks ago?
December 6th, yes.
Right.
The tree lighting night and
Yeah.
holiday open house, and that was very successful.
And what's the plan going forward?
It will be reopened every first Sunday of the month, 1 to 4, starting in January.
Yeah, that's wonderful. As a newcomer to Burlingame, say finds out about it. First of all, how are they going to know? I moved to Burlingame. How do I even know there's a Burlingame Historical Society Museum? Is there signage?
There's signage right now. There used to be better signage. We had little what they call blade signs hooked onto these pillars that another volunteer, Kent Lauder, and myself built. Again, we can't affix anything to the building, so those pillars are debatable about whether they will stay or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, we had signs there. Those signs would blow in the wind and they would break. So we have to figure out another way to publicize the museum.
Yeah.
Besides social media, which is very important.
Yeah.
And now we have a constant contact newsletter that goes out. And if you join the Historical Society, you'll get notices.
Well, let's talk about that.
Sure.
First of all, how many members does the Historical Society currently have?
I don't have an exact number, but my guess would be it hovers around 400.
Yes. And there's the public could probably come anytime, I guess.
Anytime.
Yeah. But there's 4 that are
typically
done here at the library.
Yeah, typically we have quarterly meetings. We didn't always have them at the library. We tried to actually have the meetings at the place that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So let me give you a couple of examples. One example, one of my favorites was called Burlingame 6 Feet Under.
Oh, boy.
And it took place at Crosby and Gray.
Oh, jeez.
And we had a great crowd, and we got a tour of the embalming room. And,
Yeah.
it was a lot of fun. And
Did
we got
John
to hear
Crosby take you on that?
Yeah, John Crosby
Yeah.
was there and talked a little bit about it. And also, I've forgotten his name. Well, Kent Gaisford was there. He grew up in Crosby and Gray on the second floor because his father was one of the
right, Crosby and Gray.
caretakers. Well, at Crosby and Gray.
Yeah.
So he grew up there. So he gave a little talk about growing up in the mortuary. Interesting topic. So that was fun, but we had it right there on site. We've done the same thing at Cole Mansion. We did the same thing at Burlingame High School over the years. So we tried to mix it up. But the library lane room is a great place to have a meeting. It has the electronics projector. And
It can hold around 70
it can
people,
hold
give
70,
or take.
80 people. So
Yeah.
it's a convenient place to hold a meeting.
All right. If somebody wants to join the Historical Society, how do they do that?
The easiest way is to go to our website, burlingamehistoricalsociety.org. There's a little tab that says Join, and there's an application there. It's a little bit old school. You have to print out the application, fill it out, and mail it with your check. Hopefully soon we are going to revamp the website and have some sort of way to pay electronically. Right now we have PayPal, but we don't have any like Venmo or Zelle or anything like that. But I hope that will change in the near future.
Can we go back to the museum for a minute?
Sure.
Okay. Docents. Volunteers, I guess.
Yes.
Can one volunteer to be a docent, or do they have to be on the board? Do they have to be a Historical Society member?
No.
Anything like that?
Anybody can be a docent. I'm putting together currently a docent training via video, so that you don't have to come down in person for training.
Yeah.
If you volunteer to be a docent, you watch the training video so that you can hit the ground running when you show up.
Yeah.
We always have to have 2 docents at a time for safety purposes. And also the way the space is set up, you sort of have to constantly walk around and make sure people aren't hiding or because there is I hate to say this, but there's a little bit of an element of riffraff with a public space like the train station.
Sure.
And so you want to make sure that doesn't impede the experience.
If one is to enter the museum on a Sunday, is there a pathway that takes them around, or do they just wander around?
That's a really good question, and I think it's the answer is we'll see.
Yeah.
There's no set. Some museums will have nodes where they're numbered, like you go to here first, you go to here second, you go to here third.
Right.
We don't have that, and we certainly don't have a self-guided tour.
Yeah.
That's where the docents come in. If you want a docent to take you around and explain things, you can certainly opt to do that. But you can easily just walk around yourself and look at the exhibits and read the descriptions. Most everything is labeled, so you're not looking at something and going, oh, I wonder what that is. There's always an explanation. So you could easily walk around and get the gist of it on your own.
How was the turnout the first night?
Fabulous.
Great.
Maybe 200, 250 people.
Yeah. How did anybody know it was open? I mean, was there balloons there or anything?
Yes.
Was it,
there was a couple of things.
I know it was a busy night on the Avenue because they had the Santa Claus thing going on, right?
Yeah.
But the tree lighting.
Right, the tree lighting and the
But how
holiday
did people
open
even
house.
know it was open? I mean, that's
Well, we did do a lot of publicity through social media. The city website publicized it. We have our own Facebook page if you're interested in that. So we publicized it through that. We also have the Constant Contact electronic newsletter that publicized it. What else did we do? I did put a banner outside the building. So
Great.
there's a banner out there right now. And so the word got out. Pardon me.
So people can find the Burlingame Historical Society. They get information on the website.
Yes.
Again, that was what? burlingamehistoricalsociety.org?
That's correct.
Okay. Are we on Instagram?
Facebook.
Facebook. All right. Great. All right. Good. All right. As I promised our listeners earlier, and as you committed to, before we close out, how about a few what's up with that observations that are currently going on in Burlingame?
All right. Well, I actually thought this was going to be, sort of Russ Cohen, Your Life and Times, and we haven't even scratched the surface
we haven't
of that.
scratched the surface.
So what's up with that? I mean, like I said, I could find things to complain about all the time. And I just had an experience this morning while parking the car here at the library where they've taken all the parking meters away, and I have to park you have to pay for parking at a pay station.
Right.
But the pay station is out of order. So, and all the arrows point to the one that's out of order. So I had to go walking around the whole parking garage looking for another pay station. Finally found it, figured out how that works. So that's an example of a what's up with that. Why would you point everybody to this
Right.
to
To the broken
the
one.
machine? It doesn't work.
Yeah.
My current what's up with that I've been thinking about is I've always been big on civic engagement. That's another reason I got involved in politics, because I felt like the city council and the local media weren't covering or publicizing the true issues facing Burlingame. Well, if you look at the current state of affairs, and I don't mean this to be a criticism of any government entity or the city council or city government, but it's very difficult for your ordinary citizen to participate at the local level, and we should make it easy for them to do it. But over the last few years, we've made it harder and harder for the public to become part of the process. Well, let me give you a couple of examples. Because of COVID, a lot of the city council meetings became Zoom meetings. And you could log on to the Zoom meeting. If you had a question or public comment, you'd raise your hand. You could make your public comment through Zoom. You can no longer do that.
What do you have
I
to
could
write
go-
in? Do you have to write in or something?
Then you were always able to write a letter to the city council, and it would get put into their packet, or if it was a late arriving letter, the city clerk would read the letter. They no longer do that. You can still write the city council, and it'll still be in their packet, but you have to do it early. And if it comes late, it gets put into the packet, but you don't know if the city council members are reading it because it's appeared late. It used to be the city clerk would read it to ensure that they got the information that was sent in. The city clerk no longer does that. The city clerk, and this is not a criticism of the city clerk, let me make that perfectly clear. But for example, the way they would take minutes is you could look at the minutes and you could see the discussion before the decision, before the action item. Now the minutes will only reflect the action item. So you will have no historical record or institutional memory of the discussion that happened but just before the vote was taken. So now really the only way to participate is to go to a city council meeting and get up at public comment and make your comment. That's hard for a lot of people to do. We're all very
extremely
busy
difficult,
people.
right.
And hey, I give the city council a lot of credit for the work that they do and city staff for the work they do. Remember, I was there for a blink of an eye, and I understand how hard it is, and I can appreciate that. But civic engagement needs to be promoted. I'll give another concrete example. When I was on city council, the whole 2 years, every Tuesday, I would be at Il Piccolo, and every Thursday, I would be at Copenhagen. And people could come and talk to me about their concerns.
Yeah, making yourself available is
I
what you're
made
saying.
myself available.
Yeah.
Now, I worked at the time. I worked full-time in Santa Clara, but I still made the time to do it. They've attempted to do that. Like every once in a while, you'll see that the mayor or the vice mayor is at the community center.
Right.
That needs to be very regular.
Yeah.
It cannot be irregular because then people they don't know when you're going to be there.
I was glad to see them making an attempt.
They
And
made
you're
an
right.
attempt,
They
and
have to
I
carry it on
called
now.
the mayor
Yeah.
at the time, and I congratulated them to say,
Yeah.
this is important. You
Yeah.
need to do this. But it's not regular, and people need to know instinctively, oh, the mayor's going to be at such and such a place at such and such a time every week or
Right.
once a month or whatever it is. It has to be regular. Or have town hall meetings. Like we talked about, we had a town hall meeting, and that's how the Pet Parade started. That's how things happen. The city council cannot understand the city fully unless they talk to their constituents. And there's not a lot of ways to talk to your constituents. At one time, there was a mayor who had her own newsletter that she sent out, and I'm sure she got feedback from that. So that's the part that is missing for me. I don't hear from my council members.
Right.
I just don't hear from them. And so if you don't hear from them, they're probably not going to hear from you.
Yeah.
So it works two ways. So I'd like to see a little bit more effort about civic engagement in a holistic way.
Interesting. Thank you.
So that's a what's up with that.
That's a what's up with
I mean,
that.
I could go on and on, but
Oh, Russ, thank you. Russ Cohen, thanks for being on the show today.
I can honestly say it was a pleasure.
I'd like to thank Russ Cohen for being my guest today on Burlingame. It's a small town podcast sponsored by the Burlingame Historical Society. Thanks to my director of podcasts, Mike Nagler, the great Ray Tyler for video, original music by Bray. You can hear more of Bray at braymusic.com. This podcast was recorded on Friday, December 20th, 2024 at the Burlingame Public Library. The Burlingame Historical Society copyrights this episode, and no part can be copied and replayed without the written consent of the Burlingame Historical Society. So until next time, everyone, see you around Burlingame. It's a small town.